see if this is working. It's loading up. We got a pretty big video here. If I do say so myself, but I need to see if everything is loaded. It's loading. It's loading. It is loaded. All right. We are here for another retro review. Retro review number 14 to be exact. We are here to discuss Ring of Honor, Death Before Dishonor 2022, as we're continuing to review the Briscoes versus FTR Trilogy. We're right in the middle of that, and we'll be reviewing Death Before Dishonor 2022. I know it's not a quote-unquote retro show or an older show. It's not that long ago, but I'm very excited to talk about it. But I will admit that we do have a lot of things to discuss throughout the course of this video and prior to the review portion. So last week for the WrestleMania Backlash review, I just strictly talked about the show because from WrestleMania to WrestleMania Backlash, it was like a month-ish long time. Not as much happening. What all happened I discussed during the course of that. But with this being the case, from Supercard of Honor in late March, early April, all the way to the middle of July, a lot had happened in Ring of Honor / AEW. So before we get into the review portion, I want to discuss some of the notable things that was going on in ROH, but mainly AEW. It kind of leads up to why you see these two individuals on your screen. So, he got injured, and they had to crown a interim champion, which, very messy time period for CM Punk / AEW during this time, and would get a lot more messier, I think is the best way to describe it. Probably the shining light, best thing to happen during this time period was the first ever Forbidden Door event with AEW / New Japan, which at some point I imagine that will be uploaded to Max / HBO Max, as I just learned that they renamed it that this week. So at some point that'll be discussed. So I'm not going to go through everything that happened on that event, but there's a couple of things that are important for this show. And later that week, the second Blood and Guts match took place with the Jericho Appreciation Society taking on the Blackpool Combat Club and Claudio Castagnoli, which again plays a bit of a factor into this show. And a great highlight, Swerve on Our Glory won the AEW Tag Team Champions. They had a great run. I enjoyed Swerve in Our Glory. I hope to see Keith Lee back at AEW one day. Now, this week in AEW, the July 20th and 22nd episode of Dynamite and Rampage. Rampage, not that much happened. The most notable thing that happened, and I wrote down, was a rap battle between Max Caster and Austin Gunn, which I like to describe from All Out 2021 to All Out 2022. AEW could do very little wrong. And, of course, like when I say that and think of that, I immediately find something that I could consider wrong with doing this rap battle. And I did not rewatch this, but I remember not enjoying it at the time. Jay Lethal defeated Christopher Daniels to prepare for his Death Before Dishonor matchup. Now, the main thing, this was Fyter Fest Week 2, a part of Shark Week. Eddie Kingston faced Chris Jericho one final time in a barbed wire death match with the Jericho Appreciation Society locked in a shark cage. Again, it had the Shark Week tie-in with it, and I can very much say this. This is one of the few things that I hate in AEW history. So again, this is a time period where AEW can do very little wrong, and I sadly found a week where they did two things that I absolutely... But this matchup, I just hated it. I hated the ending. The ending was a botch and a mess up and just interference. It was a matchup I was really looking forward to, and I was like, this is special. This is cool that we're doing something special for an episode of Dynamite, and they just It was a wet fart. It was very much a wet fart. But I guess I could say they made up for it with this Death Before Dishonor event that happened that weekend on a Saturday. So we're going to go through the 0 hour right now, and then we're going to do some other preview notes. So let's go through the 0 hour. The first matchup on the pre-show was Colt Cabana versus Anthony Henry, as there is no code of honor to start this matchup off. We have many wrist locks. I guess I should start this. Many wrist locks early until Henry lands a big forearm and a big pile driver that gets a 2 count. Cabana's comeback starts with a series of elbows, the flying apple, and a clothesline that gets a 2 count. JD Drake, who is at ringside, starts to interfere, setting up Henry to hit a drop kick and a frog splash in the ring. Cabana's reversal leads to Colt applying the Billy Goat's curse until Drake interferes once again, but it does not help Henry out as Colt wins off of a moonsault, which is very impressive. And if you remember me talking about Supercard of Honor and Colt Cabana's relationship in this era of Ring of Honor, a lot of that started to speculate and like twirl around here. So at least Colt was able to put up a good performance. I enjoyed this matchup a lot more than the Supercard of Honor matchup. So there is that. And when we get to our final battle review in a couple of weeks, we'll have even more Colt Cabana to talk about then. Next is a quick matchup including Eli Isom and Cheeseburger of the Shinobi Shadow Squad taking on the Trustbusters, Ari Daivari, and Slim J. I'm trying to keep the timestamps, and I keep forgetting to write them down. But that's what I was doing there. Cheeseburger Daivari starts the matchup off, but we get frequent tags throughout it. And like I said, this was a quick matchup with the Trustbusters, winning off of double frog splashes. Next, and I would say that this is a messy... At the time, I looked at this as a messy situation, but it worked out for the best and was cleaned up very nicely. We had Blake Christian, Tony Deppen, and Alex Zane to take on Tully Blanchard Enterprises. Or that's what we were thinking, as in an interview, Prince Nana returned to Ring of Honor and announced that he had purchased Tully Blanchard Enterprises and had reassembled the embassy. And so the Gates of Agony, Brian Cage, and one other man would be a part of this new embassy. And ultimately, at the time, I was like, what the hell is this? But Tully Blanchard just left. He asked to leave and has not appeared in AEW or Ring of Honor since then. He's appeared at least once in Impact that I know of, but he was just done. Tully Blanchard Enterprises lasted from Supercard of Honor to Death Before Dishonor, technically. But at the time, I was like, this is not a good sign, but spoiler alert, it worked out and turned into the Mogul Embassy and got us the partnership of Swerve Strickland and Prince Nana, which is still going on to this day. So the beginning or the reintroduction to the embassy to Ring of Honor as the Gates of Agony and Brian Cage take on Blake Christian, Tony Deppen, and Alex Zane. Zane and Cage start the matchup off until Deppen quickly tags in. The match picks up once Zane and Khan tag in, and later Toa hits the pounce, period, on him. Leona then hits an apron splash followed by a cage suplex. Once Zane lands a pop-up knee, he is able to tag Christian in with him and with both Deppen and Christian doing dives to the outside onto the Gates of Agony. We get a springboard 450 and running knee to Cage that gets a 2 count. And then the Gates join Cage in the ring to deliver to triple team on Deppen and win off of a Cage running boot into a Toa Leona power slam. So the Embassy / Gates of Agony, Brad Cage continue their winning ways. We have one more match left on the 0 hour that involves Allison Kay versus Willow Nightingale. Willow delivers an enziguri early after a cartwheel, with Kay landing a big neck breaker and running knee soon after. A chop exchange soon happens with the two and clotheslines as well as Kay applies a Kimura that Willow transitions into a pin. Kay lands a Deadeye that gets a 2 count, and then Willow lands a pounce, period. And then the Babe with the powerbomb to pick up the victory and close out this 0 hour, which, by the way, it's not on Honor. If it is on Honor Club, it's not attached to the Death Before Dishonor pay-per-view. I had to watch this on YouTube, but it's not really much of a complaint, but it sets the tone for what we're getting ready to do here, and that is Death Before Dishonor. But before we get into Death Before Dishonor, I want to talk about the things that were going on in Ring of Honor at the time, because earlier it was mainly AEW stuff. We're going to talk about the championship situations that were happening in Ring of Honor, and then we'll get to the review. I promise that we will get to the review of the main show after that. So, noticeably, at Supercard of Honor, the six-man tag titles were not defended, and you would think, hey, maybe they're done with the six-man tag titles. No. They'll be defended tonight, and this was their first appearance and reintroduction on this show. The tag team titles, which is a part of the double main event, was the most anticipated matchup on this show. But the Briscoes had been competing in other companies around this time period, most notably Impact and GCW, winning the titles in those companies, but those titles did not appear on this show, while other sets of tag titles did appear, and that was for FTR, who were already the AAA Tag Team Champions, but at Forbidden Door added the IWGP Tag Team titles with them. So at this one time, FTR was Ring of Honor Tag Champions, AAA Tag Team Champions, and the IWGP Heavyweight Tag Team Championships, which we'll discuss more of the story with this heated trilogy later on. The Pure title, Wheeler Yuta successfully defended against the previous champion Josh Woods on an episode of Dark, but most of his time during this time was dedicated to the Best of Super Juniors tournament and being involved in the Blackpool Combat Club Jericho Appreciation Society rivalry, which includes the matchup here tonight. The women's title. I mentioned that Mercedes Martinez and Deonna Purrazzo were interim and actual champions, and the title unification happened on the May 4th episode of Dynamite in the main event, which I feel is a forgotten Dynamite main event potentially. But we would see Mercedes Martinez win this matchup. And she would have several defenses on Dark, but most of this time period was spent teaming with Serena Deeb, who, yes, is her opponent tonight and was a part of this story. Another Dynamite main event included the Television Championship, where Samoa Joe defeated Minoru Suzuki in his one and only defense as the Television Championship champion, with Joe dedicated his time to the Owen Hart Foundation tournament and Twisted Metal, but he does have a matchup, obviously, later on this show. And the most intriguing thing, and probably the thing I have the most to talk about in this video, the World Heavyweight Championship. Jonathan Gresham successfully defended the world title against Dalton Castle at Battle of the Belts 2. But the quote-unquote issue around this time was that he was not getting enough TV time, especially compared to these other champions who FTR are appearing regularly, Wheeler Yuta was appearing regularly, Samoa Joe was appearing regularly, and Mercedes Martinez kinda was, but mainly on Dark. But if you notice, none of those people were the World Heavyweight Champion. And a lot of issues arose and came about with this, but he eventually did get some TV time, teaming up with Lee Moriarty to take on the Gates of Agony in a matchup that would see him turn on Lee Moriarty and join Tully Blanchard Enterprises. It's something that I still kind of scratch my head at to this day about, but does lead into our opening contest of this show. And that is the World Heavyweight title match. Jonathan Gresham defending against Claudio Castagnoli, who I said debuted in AEW at Forbidden Door and now is making his return in Ring of Honor here at this event. A coin toss. I also mentioned this is a double main event. I'm saying that quote unquote, but a coin toss determined what match would go first, and I don't know how a double main event would be the opening match, but this is going to be a head-ass statement, but I'm actually of the belief that the opening match is very important. It sets the tone for the show. So being in the opening match is not that big of a deal. I will say that. William Regal is also here. I wanted to mention that. And I thought at first that Prince Nana did not come out with Jonathan Gresham, but he did a little bit later on. We get a technical start that leads to Claudio landing a big swing early. Gresham then targets the ankle of Claudio, so much so that Claudio struggles with a second rope suplex and a sharpshooter attempt, with Gresham applying an ankle lock soon after that. We get lots of uppercuts and forearms and between the two. And then we get a lot of elbows from Claudio that leads to him hitting the Ricola bomb and us crowning a new Ring of Honor World Champion. So for back-to-back Ring of Honor pay-per-views, we have new World Heavyweight Champions. And this time around, it was Claudio Castagnoli. Now, the thing that I will say, and this is opinion. This would be, all right, this thing that I'm about to say is not opinion. It's a literal fact. This would be Jonathan Gresham's last show in AEW / Ring of Honor, as he would earlier the day ask for his release. Now, apparently there was an argument between him and Tony Khan. Things were said. I don't know what was actually said. Obviously, they had to have an argument with words, obviously, but we do know that this would be Gresham's last show in Ring of Honor. And at the time, the AEW fan base was very one-sided. Once All Out happens, that's where it kind of seemed like there was a civil war. There was kind of a split in the AEW fandom online. But at the time, a lot of AEW fans agreed with the same thing, the same sentiments, in my opinion. At least what I saw. So what I'm getting at here is when this incident happened, this trans of events happened, a lot of them were good riddance, Gresham. We do not care. Whereas somebody that was watching the previous regime of Ring of Honor and seeing Gresham's work in the previous regime of Ring of Honor, I did care. And I kind of understood what the hell, like, why he was frustrated. Where I don't think a lot of people went through that thought process and cared that much. I think that he had one of the most effed up Ring of Honor World title reigns, because it's literally in the middle of the company being sold and transition into a new period. So he has to go out on his own and defend the titles in other companies. And then by the time the company is sold and we're in this new era, he's not seen that much. And you kind of forget that he's the damn champion. And then I think this is what did it all. Again, you don't really know. This is just me thinking it. Putting him with Tully Blanchard Enterprises, a group that he does not really fit with, and just kind of doing it out of nowhere without any actual reasoning, probably pissed him off. And then, by the way, we're going to do this thing where you're a part of this big faction and it's a big deal. We're going to take the world title away from you right away. Which, again, at the time, and even now, I understand Claudio winning the Ring of Honor World title. I'm not that against that. Claudio is a Ring of Honor legend. He had never held a world championship, even though he was PWG champion, but him being Ring of Honor World champion was a big deal. And he would go on to have a great reign with some good great matches. But I felt that people just pushed this aside and made Gresham look like an asshole, where I personally understood why he would be frustrated. Where I feel that a lot of people didn't really understand his frustrations, in my opinion. So it sucks to see his reign and time in ROH end this way, especially because, again, he did a lot for ROH. He revitalized the Pure division. I won't say he's the best Pure champion, because I feel that's a slap to Nigel McGuinness, but he had a great Pure title reign, nonetheless. And it definitely sucked that this is the way that his time in ROH/AEW came to an end. I wish that they could have done or did some better things together. But all in all, we started the show off crowning a new Ring of Honor World Champion. And now we have the return of the six-man tag team titles. Now, what is even funny about this? It is the Righteous, Dutch, Vincent, and Bateman versus Dalton Castle and the Boys. Fun fact, Dalton Castle and the Boys won the Ring of Honor six-man tag team championships in Lowell, Massachusetts, where this event happened back in the day in 2016, I believe. Might have been 17. I think it was 2016. I didn't write that down. But what's even more funny, what I was saying is funny, and I probably should have talked about this, but in Impact, they were doing an angle/storyline involving a group of former Ring of Honor competitors. Mike Bennett, Matt Taven, Maria Kanellis, Kenny King, PCO, Eddie Edwards, and most notably Vincent, called Honor No More. Now, I believe at the time of filming this group was still a thing. I don't think this faction ended to the end of the year. which we talk about invasion angles all the time in wrestling. This is kind of a forgotten one. And again, it didn't even happen that damn long ago. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that he's in a Ring of Honor invasion angle in another company, and he's returning back to Ring of Honor to, spoiler alert, lose the 6-man tag team titles. But Honor No More, I felt that I needed to give them an honorable mention. I'm also trying to delay things because I'm trying to set this match up. But we have a 6-man tag team title match with The Righteous versus Dalton Castle and the Boys. This is the other thing. Matt Taven and Vincent, they were part of the Kingdom together. Yes, y'all remember the Kingdom. And then they spent like 2 years feuding with one another. And it mainly like overstayed its welcome, and the rivalry continued for too long because the pandemic happened and they were still doing the damn rivalry. And if finally the rivalry ends, the company ends, sadly, they just joined back up in another. That bothered the hell out of me at the time, and a little bit now because I'm mentioning it now. Let's get to this damn match. Castle and Vincent start the matchup off with Castle targeting suplexes early on. Dutch tags in, delivering double clotheslines to both of the Boys. Castle makes the save by tossing the Boys onto the members of the Righteous at ringside. Then Vita Von Star, who was the manager of the Righteous, tries to do a dive onto the Boys, but they move out of the way, and it ends up just being a distraction as Dutch dives onto them. Vincent then hits the Orange Sunshine in the ring, but Castle does not allow a pin, and he is able to pin Bateman after landing a bangarang. So Dalton Castle and the Boys win the 6-man tag team titles back after not holding them. And the Righteous, allegedly, were not in Ring of Honor anymore, which they had a good match at Final Battle and then did nothing after that. So there is that. Just now, we have a pure title match to discuss. Wheeler Yuta versus Daniel Garcia. Earlier in the show, Garcia mentions that in other sports, people and fans don't just suggest, hey, let's add more rules. And he says that when he wins the pure title, he's going to bring it to the A show, the main show, Dynamite, and break it into a bunch of pieces. Again, this is in the midst of the Blackpool Combat Club and Jericho Appreciation Society rivalry. As the judges for this pure title match, 2 former pure champions, John Walters and Josh Woods, and Ace Steel, who y'all would get very familiar with. We get a forearm exchange after the Code of Honor happens. Then the two exchange straight jacket holds until Garcia tosses Yuta to the outside. Yuta is able to come back with a German suplex and a wrist lock that Garcia bites his way out of. Yuta delivers a top rope drop kick with both men knocked down after a double clothesline, and then we get a chop exchange between the two. Yuta's suplex is transitioned into a crossface, and then Garcia's sharpshooter is transitioned into another crossface as Garcia then applies the Regal stretch, which William Regal was accompanying Wheeler Yuta, but was on commentary for this match. And Yuta then applies the Lion Tamer, which obviously was Chris Jericho's maneuver. So both men using the opposite person's mentor's submission maneuvers. As Garcia uses his first rope break attempt after getting out of this Lion Tamer. And then Garcia hits a pile driver that gets a 2 count. But upon standing up, Yuta trips Garcia into a roll-up and gets a quick 3 count, ending this matchup. And there's no Code of Honor post-match. Now, what's fitting about this is I keep beating y'all over the head with the Briscoes FTR Trilogy. That's the whole series of this. Spoiler alert, for Final Battle, we'll be discussing a third trilogy match involving Wheeler Yuta and Daniel Garcia, because they would have a matchup in the middle, which at some point I hope to cover, because like I said, we'll be discussing the third matchup at Final Battle. And I know I've said this several times, but it doesn't hurt to say it again. For this retro review series, my ultimate idea, my big idea, is to cover the month of TV leading up to All Out 2022. Because, again, AEW was on an all-time run. So my plan is to start... I'm going to go through every damn episode here. It starts at Quake by the Lake. Jon Moxley versus Chris Jericho. CM Punk returns there. There's also a Darby Allin, Brody King coffin match. The next week, all-time episode of Dynamite, House of the Dragon, the start of the Trios tournament, the return of Kenny Omega, Bryan Danielson, Daniel Garcia 2 out of 3 falls match, CM Punk, that's not cowboy shit, that's coward shit promo. The next week, One of the most controversial matches in wrestling / AEW history. When they do CM Punk, Jon Moxley, one main event of that show, Death Triangle versus the United Empire in the Trios tournament. The next week is the Go Home Episode 2 All Out, which is the United Empire versus the Elite in the Trios tournament. Then we got All Out itself. And then we're going to wrap it up by discussing the post-Dynamite edition, or the post-All Out Dynamite edition, which that's where that second Wheeler Yuta and Daniel Garcia matchup takes place at. So at some point, I'm going to hope that these Dynamites and the pay-per-view itself get uploaded to HBO Max, or I find a way to watch them, because I know that I have at least one of them saved on the DVR. The rest of them got deleted, but you get the point. Also on that episode of Dynamite is Hangman Page versus Bryan Danielson 3, which is another trilogy that I want to cover. I'm a big fan of trilogies. The Star Wars prequels, the Dark Knight trilogy, Danielson versus Hangman, even though they've had another match since then. You get the point, but I also want to I don't want to half-ass it, but you get the point to where we're at now. Back to Death Before Dishonor. We have a battle of brothers right here. Dragon Lee taking on Roosh, two men that were very successful in their previous tenures in Ring of Honor, as they were. Roosh, at the time, was the third longest reigning world champion, because his reign was during the pandemic. And Dragon Lee had a very long reign as the television champion, because he also championed during the pandemic, even though they had title changes during that era as well. But we have Dragon Lee versus Roosh, which again, was even more interesting about this is that Dragon Lee and Roosh and Andrade would form a team for that Trios tournament that I was just talking about, but this is before that even happened. So we have Dragon Lee versus Roosh for this matchup right here. Back and forth start with tie-ups, and this changes up when Roosh gets frustrated and lands a big forearm. Then he tosses Dragon Lee into the barricades on the outside. Dragon Lee gets back into it with a tope suicida, with both men crashing through the tables, which is our first ringside table break of the night. Won't be the last. Back in the ring, the two exchange vicious chops, and even on the apron where Dragon Lee is launched off of by Roosh, and then retaliates with a Hurricane Rana off the apron moments later. Both get back of the ring by the count of 19, because in Ring of Honor it is a 20 count. Then Roosh lands the Bull's Horn that gets a very, very close 2 count. Dragon Lee's double stomp gets a 1 count with Roosh kicking out. Then we get a running knee by Dragon Lee that gets a 2 count. And then Roosh lands the Bull's Horn once again for a 3 count. And this was his 10th straight victory, as Ian Riccaboni mentioned on commentary. And he would use that momentum to get an interim AEW title shot on that week's episode of Dynamite against Jon Moxley. But this was an enjoyable matchup, as we're going to take a water break right now. We're 30 minutes in. Let's try to keep this review under an hour. We got 3 more matches left, but one of these matches that we discussed went 43 minutes, so we'll see how long this takes. As the next matchup is for the Ring of Honor Women's Championship, Mercedes Martinez versus Serena Deeb. Serena Deeb and Martinez started teaming up around this time period, and I guess that Serena Deeb did it on purpose because she was scouting Martinez and studying Martinez to use this to her favor for this title shot that she received right here. Deeb targets the arm early on, later landing a spear on the outside apron and a cutter off of the second rope. Martinez applies the Brass City Sleeper while both are on the top turnbuckle. Back and forth submission and pinfall attempts follow this. Martinez reverses a piledriver attempt with a running knee and German suplex off of the top rope. Then she tries to apply the Brass City Sleeper again, but Deeb bites her way out of it. This time attempts to apply the Serenity Lock, but Martinez lands the OG drop for a 2 count and once again applies the Brass City Sleeper, with Deeb tapping out and Martinez retaining her championship. This was the first half of this match, the crowd were not into it. I'm glad that they built their way to the crowd being interested in the second half of the match, because the match really did pick up. As now, we have a television title match to discuss. When we left Supercard of Honor, Samoa Joe had made his debut in AEW and his return to Ring of Honor, and like I mentioned, soon after would capture the Ring of Honor Television Championship, but at Supercard of Honor attacked Jay Lethal. And in the early days of Ring of Honor / Jay Lethal's career, Samoa Joe was a mentor to Jay Lethal. And Jay Lethal was not really that appreciative of it and has grown to hate Samoa Joe and hated him even more because he has the television championship. So that is how this matchup is set up, as I'm trying to set this matchup up. Earlier in the show, Jay Lethal also had a promo with Satnam Singh and Sanjay Dutt because they're all wearing white. And it was supposed to be in celebration. And Satnam Singh and Sanjay Dutt do show up during this matchup. And they're still in their white attire. So I felt that should have been mentioned. I have these matchups wrote down that I plan to do. So here's another one. Samoa Joe. Jay Lethal. They have so much hatred for one another that they start to brawl before the bell even rings. And Lethal lands 3 dives to the outside, with Joe landing the Olay kicks on the outside. And then Satnam Singh, like I mentioned, appears and it stops Joe from putting Lethal through an announce table. And instead puts his arm in a chair and slams it into the outside turnbuckle. So Joe's arm is damaged, and then the match starts. This outside brawl lasted a while, but now the matchup is finally starting between Joe and Lethal, but Singh won't be able to enjoy it. He was told to go to the back. Both men land enziguris early on, with Joe landing his own and then a dive as well. Lethal attempts a muscle buster, but Joe reverses it with a leg lariat off of the second rope. Joe attempts a muscle buster, but Lethal lands the lethal injection, getting a close 2 count. Then Sanjay comes out to distract the referee, so Lethal can hit Joe with the television championship. That gets another close 2 count. Then the lethal injection is reversed into a coquina clutch, and then a Jay Lethal roll-up into another coquina clutch attempt that Lethal taps out of, and Samoa Joe retains his television championship. As now we're here, this is the match we're waiting for, the one that this whole show, rivalry, and series is built around. FTR versus the Briscoes 2 for the Ring of Honor World Tag Team Championships. But the big difference this time around, it is a 2 out of 3 falls match. There's a great segment involving these two teams where they are sitting down. Caprice Coleman is hosting an interview between the two sides, talking about their matchups and what to expect from this matchup. And, you know, the two sides did not like one another. They respected one another, but they did not like one another. And tensions boiled over that they felt the need to continue the matchup and add the 2 out of 3 falls stipulation. So here we go. FTR Briscoes 2. After an intense stare down, Mark and Dax are the first to start the match off. Mainly with tie-ups, it speeds up once Jay tags in. The Briscoes corner Cash with Dax trying to help him out, but he struggles to. Dax finally gets back in the ring with a series of roll-ups with Mark. Cash lands a big lariat on Mark, stopping him from hitting an outside elbow drop. But the Briscoes strike first with a Doomsday Device, getting the first fall on Dax. I will mention I will mention this now so I don't forget it. I appreciate 2 out of 3 falls matches that are long, because I feel that the way WWE does 2 out of 3 falls matches, they need to fit it in a time frame, and so the match goes quick. You get a screwy finish for first fall. So they're like 2 out of 3 falls matchups in my eyes and in my mind should be a long drawn out bout, because in a like we saw these two teams compete already, and it was like a 25-ish minute match. So I don't feel there'd be like reasonable way for this matchup to be done that quickly, you know? So I appreciate the longer 2 out of 3 falls matchups. The perfect example of this is Okada and Omega at Dominion several years ago, which is one of the best matches ever. And I did watch that match when it happened at like 5 a.m. So that matchup always sticks out in my mind. So this is another 2 out of 3 falls matchup that is very much like this. But the Briscoes get the first fall. Dax has to fight on his own as Cash is being knocked off of the apron, and he does so with several suplexes on Jay, including one off of the top rope. Briscoes land the redneck bookie that gets a close 2 count. Then Cash finally tags back in, landing a big brainbuster on Mark that gets a close 2 count. He follows this up with a gory special that gets another close 2 count, and then they all start to brawl on the outside with Jay cracking Cash with the ring bell. Dax breaks up the pin that Mark does after a froggy bow, and then FTR are able to even this up with a big rig that is 30 minutes in now, and we're now at 1-1. There's a bit of a break here, so I'm going to set this last matchup up. Because I wrote down 6 matches to do, and this one is fitting because it's a match that actually happened around this time period, so, and it involves 2 of the people involved in the show. 1-1, 30 minutes in. Mark lands a blockbuster on Dax on the outside. This does not bother him as much as Dax lands a piledriver in the ring on Jay that gets a close 2 count. Dax and Jay are exchanging forearms with Dax accidentally hitting the referee, and then Jay lands a Jay Driller on Dax that gets a 10 count. But as I just mentioned, the referee is not down, so the match still goes on. FTR land a big rig on Jay with the referee still coming to, and once he is able to count the pinfall, Jay is able to kick out. We get a Doomsday Device once again on Dax, but Cash is able to break up the pin. Punches and bunches from both Jay and Dax, leading to the Briscoes applying a double camel clutch onto FTR as they clutch one another with their hands. Mark then goes up to deliver a top rope maneuver, but we don't know what that was going to be as Cash grabs him and they both go backwards through the outside a table, which is the 3rd time this same table was crashed through on the night. Would be the last time, to be fair. We get a Jay Driller on Dax that gets another 2 count, and then they both start to battle on the 2nd rope with Dax able to maneuver himself to land a pile driver and turn Jay over to get that 3 count and win 2-1 as FTR win this matchup and retain the Ring of Honor World Championships. The Briscoes, World Tag Team Championships. Fuck it, World Championships as well. The Briscoes don't want to celebrate and adhere to the Code of Honor, but eventually do so as FTR celebrate with all of their championships as they admire how much they love the fans and love pro wrestling. Then we have a very awkward cliffhanger as Claudio Castagnoli and Wheeler Yuta appear, who both won their matchups earlier in the show. And it's only awkward because it took years to get something out of this. They finally, Wheeler Yuta, Claudio, and FTR had a 2-on-2 matchup on Collision 2 years later. Collision didn't even exist during this time period, believe it or not. So, it was a very awkward cliffhanger. Also wanted to be known that William Regal, when he was on commentator earlier in the show, he was mentioning how he doesn't want that many people in the Blackpool Combat Club, and he doesn't want the best in the Blackpool Combat Club because he wants his group to face the best wrestlers. So, that's what I was thinking of when this was going on. So, overall, a great pay-per-view. Now, I was thinking this over. I will wait until Final Battle, but I do think that this is my favorite ROH pay-per-view of the Tony Khan era, and I think it's the best one of the Tony Khan era. I'll watch Final Battle because I remember there's 110% one match that I love. It's the FTR Briscoes match. But the other matches on the show I felt could not compare or come close to that match. So, time will tell when we cover Final Battle 2022. That'll be the final match or the final show of this FTR Briscoes trilogy, obviously. We need to still cover Hell in the Cell 2022, which is the final match of the Cody Rhodes-Seth Rollins trilogy. But before we do either one of those, next week is Double or Nothing week in AEW. We're going back to AEW review because we've only done one thus far with Revolution 2022. And we'll be discussing the very first Double or Nothing 2019. So next week's review, we're taking a break from these trilogies of Seth and Cody, FTR Briscoes. We're going to cover Double or Nothing 2019. Return back to discuss those trilogies, and we'll see what happens there. So I'm going to end this video because I am sweating. I only took one water break for y'all. I'm sorry that this and the Ring of Honor TV review are probably the only videos this week. Not that much to discuss. Thing one, there's not that much to discuss. Thing two, allergies are whooping my ass, which most of the time when I have an excuse, it's that allergies are whooping my ass. So that's why I was struggling some during this video, but not struggling as much. Thing three, as always, if you want to know who the hell wins this matchup, because I'm going to hit the end, comment down below and let me know that you watched the whole video as well, and I'll tell you who the hell wins this matchup. So I do appreciate you all for watching this. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, because I'm out for now. Goodbye.